friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie 0604. In that neighborhood. My brothers and sisters. Today is the first day of fall 2024, Bean Team. And it's also another Sunday. So y'all know that we about to go back to the man. We about to go back to the myth. We about to go back to the legend. MrBallen. MrBallen Sundays, y'all. And the title of the video is Horrifying Cryptid Encounters from Across the Globe. Sound like Halloween is coming early, Bean Team. Like, for real, man. I know this is going to be a great video from the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. And I'm ready to get into it. But before we get into it, my brothers and sisters, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. Another MrBallen Sunday. Y'all got what y'all need? Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Today, we're going to look at 2 spooky stories about people's run-ins with terrifying creatures. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please take the like button out to pet some furry, cute animals at the zoo, but instead of taking them to the zoo, take them to pet a pack of wild, hungry hyenas and stack their pockets full of hot dogs. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. And also, I am on tour right now, so be sure you follow me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is just MrBallen, where you will see all the behind-the-scenes magic of us being on tour. It's really good. Again, Instagram, MrBallen is my handle. Check it out. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Just after midnight on May 1st, 1971, a 20-year-old woman named Elizabeth Ford was sleeping on a couch in the front room of a small house near a city in Arkansas called Texarkana. Elizabeth and her husband Bobby were staying at the house with Bobby's brother and his wife, who owned the house. Bobby and his brother were still both awake, and Elizabeth could hear them talking in the kitchen quietly. The house was surrounded by woods and swampland, and Elizabeth had opened up a window above the couch, so a breeze was blowing in. Now, usually, she slept really well with the sound of the woods in the background, but tonight, she was tossing and turning. And this was because, as she lay there trying to sleep, she became very aware of a unique sound coming from outside that was not the sound of, the trees blowing in the wind or the insects buzzing. This was something else. It was a slow creaking sound, and at first, it kind of sounded like it could be out in the woods somewhere, but eventually Elizabeth realized this creaking sound was sort of moving back and forth, right outside on the porch below the open window. Suddenly, Elizabeth's eyes flew open and she looked at the window because this creaking sound had just intensified and then came to a stop on the immediate other side of this window, like there was something heavy right outside. Elizabeth sat up to face the window, but she didn't see anything outside through the screen. And so right away, she felt totally relieved. She didn't know what that sound was, but clearly there was nothing there. However, just to be certain, she decided she would go a little bit closer to the screen and actually look right up close to make sure there was nothing down below on the porch.
And smart move, Alyssa. Smart freaking move. Just because you ain't see it from a distance, you gotta go investigate a little more, man. Even though I'm saying smart move, this might be a dumb move if whoever out there or whatever out there just jump up and grab her ass. You know what I'm saying, man? Where are we going on this one, y'all? So far, so good.
So Elizabeth leaned forward and pressed her face to the screen and began to look. And as she did, this dark figure down below suddenly rose up and completely blocked out the window. And Elizabeth's looking at it, having no idea what it is. And before she could do anything, this huge thing slashed at the screen. And this big reddish furry brown paw with razor sharp claws cut through the screen and nearly cut Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth screamed and practically fell over, and this dark creature outside turned and bolted and disappeared. And then a moment later, Elizabeth's husband Bobby and his brother came running into the room asking what was going on. Elizabeth was so shocked at what she had just experienced that all she could say to her husband was, "It's a bear! It's a bear!" Bobby helped Elizabeth off the couch and then told her and his brother's wife to stay in the house and away from the windows. And then Bobby and his brother got shotguns and flashlights and went outside. Once outside,
W boyfriends or husbands or whatever they are, you know what I'm saying? They being the man in this situation. They're being the men in this situation. They got their things on them, they shotguns or whatever, and they going out to investigate. Shout out to them. But I was just joking, y'all. I didn't think that the damn thing was gonna pop up for real. It tried to slash her. It ain't try to snatch her, but still, man, that is effing crazy. And I'm not sure that's a bear. It seemed like a freaking werewolf. Are werewolves real? I ain't gonna even get into all that. Let's go.
Outside, Bobby and his brother began scanning all around the porch area where Elizabeth had apparently seen this bear to see where it was. They held their flashlights out and they scanned the tree lines. They looked all over the place, all around the front of the property, but there was no sign of this animal. And so the brothers looked at each other and nodded, and then they both left the porch and went different directions, kind of looping around the back of the house. They were going to scan the entire property and meet up at the back. And when they met up at the back, they still hadn't found this bear, and so they walked away from the house towards the tree line and did another big sweep together of the entire perimeter, again, looking for any sign of this animal. But there was nothing. And so after a while of circling the property, the brothers decided that, this bear must have just run off. And so Bobby and his brother returned to the porch to figure out their next move. Both Bobby and his brother were hunters, and they knew that usually the best thing to do with the bears that roamed this area was to leave them alone. I mean, these bears could grow to be 500 pounds, and if they were provoked, they could run at 35 miles an hour. And so generally, you just stayed away from these things, and they'd leave you alone too. However, as the brothers were sitting there talking through what had happened that night, they both said, it definitely seemed like this bear was different. I mean, apparently it was aggressive enough to come right up to the house unprovoked and reach in and swipe at Elizabeth, which obviously was not normal bear behavior. And so to Bobby and his brother, this meant that they really couldn't just leave this bear alone. They had to go out there and find it and kill it to protect themselves. And so Bobby lit a cigarette to calm his nerves, and then the two brothers came up with a plan for how they were going to go find this bear. Bobby's brother would man the front of the house, and Bobby would man the back of the house. And they would stay in their respective positions monitoring the property until either they saw the bear and dealt with it, or until the sun came up, at which point they could go get help. And so after agreeing to this plan, Bobby took one final drag on his cigarette, chucked it to the ground, and then with his shotgun in one hand and his flashlight in the other, he stepped off the porch and walked around to the back of the house and stared off into the darkness. Bobby had only been in the back of the house for a couple of minutes manning his post when he began to smell this horrible smell. Now, at first he thought it was just some sort of wet, musky smell that came over from the swampland nearby, but as he continued to smell it, it got heavier and more pungent. It smelled like a wet, decaying animal. Bobby tensed up and aimed his flashlight up at the tree line and began looking back and forth, trying to figure out where this horrible smell was coming from. And as he was doing this, he suddenly heard the sound of tree branches snapping off to his left. And so he whipped his flashlight over and shined it, and he saw this big dark figure charging across the property away from him into the forest. Bobby instinctively raised his shotgun and fired, and then after shooting, a loud yelp echoed in the air, and then Bobby just took off running in the direction he had just fired. And as he's running across the yard, he's screaming for his brother, who had already heard the shotgun blast, so he was coming around the house, and the two men linked up, and as they're running in the direction of this bear, Bobby's telling his brother, "I think I got it, I shot the bear." But they get over to where Bobby had last seen it and where he heard this yelp come from, and there was nothing, there was no bear. Still, the brothers did feel a little relieved. They figured even if they couldn't find this thing, clearly Bobby had hit it. He had heard the sound of it yelping out, and so maybe by at least wounding it, it would stay away and leave them alone. But just then, the men heard the sound of their wives screaming from inside the house. The men immediately ran back to the house, and as they got closer, Bobby, again, began to smell that horrible smell. And right as Bobby's foot hit that first porch step, his brother from behind him screamed out, "Stop!" But it was too late. The bear was on the porch. That's why the women were screaming. They had seen it, and Bobby's brother had seen it, but Bobby hadn't. And now he was too close to it to get away. And before Bobby could raise his gun to protect himself, this thing attacked. And Bobby felt this horrible burning, tearing sensation in his arm. He fell to the ground, twisting wildly back and forth, trying to protect himself. He was pinned underneath this enormous bear, level with its chest, with its arms and legs on either side of him. And that horrible smell he was smelling was clearly coming from this animal. That's all he could smell from underneath. But just then, it was like a miracle, because to his side, Bobby could see there was an opening, and so he rolled and somehow got out from underneath this enormous creature. Bobby scrambled up to his feet, and he darted past the bear and rammed into the closed front door of the house. It popped open, he fell inside, and his wife ran forward and shut the door behind him, leaving Bobby's brother outside on the porch alone with the bear. But before any of them could do anything about that, they heard the sound of his brother's shotgun going off. Then,
yeah, man, he ain't had no choice but to shoot at that point. He the only one out there with the bell. But I just gotta say, Bobby is lucky as hell to survive that. You literally up under the bear, and I still don't know if this a bear or not. But you literally up under this creature. You know what I'm saying, man? This hundreds of pound creature, and he was able to escape. But now his brother out there by himself. He ain't had no choice but to shoot at that point. Survival of the freaking fittest round is, you know what?
Then there was a long moment of silence. Inside the house, everybody was frozen. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened and Bobby's brother walked inside. Everyone was too shocked to say anything, so for a second they all just stared at each other, and then finally Bobby asked him, "Is the bear dead?" And Bobby's brother, with a trembling voice, said no. And that wasn't a bear. As soon as dawn broke and it was not dark outside anymore, Bobby's wife drove him to the hospital where they would treat him for shock and for the wound to his shoulder. They had hoped to find it somewhere on the property, either dead or wounded, based on Bobby's brother's account of having fired at it basically point blank, but the creature was gone. They did find its tracks though, and this discovery made it clear that Bobby's brother was right, that this wasn't a bear. Because in the dirt surrounding the house were all these bizarre footprints and handprints of a creature that seemed to walk on its hind legs with 3 toes on each and had 3 long sharp claws on its hands. And as
they was out there fighting Sasquatch. They was fighting Bigfoot, man.
Unbelievable as this all seemed to the police, this actually tracked with what Bobby's brother said he saw when he was out on the porch. He said he saw a creature with reddish brown hair all over it that stood over 7 feet tall, and after being shot, it took off running on 2 legs, and it ran fast. But the most terrifying thing about it, at least according to Bobby's brother, was actually its eyes. They were blazing red. And when the news of this attack spread to the nearest town, which was called Fouke, the people there knew exactly what this creature was. For 200 years, people in that part of Arkansas had been talking about this huge creature that was sort of like a Sasquatch that roamed the forest and the swamps. They said it was fast and elusive, and it ate livestock and pets. They called it the Fouke Monster, or sometimes the Boggy Creek Monster. But Bobby Ford and his family's encounter with this creature was unlike any other story that had been told about the Fouke Monster. While some people claimed in the past that this creature had attacked people, nobody had ever heard of it actually coming up to somebody's house, trying to break in and terrorize a family. Bobby's ordeal would inspire the 1972 horror movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. Over the years, police officers and some scientists have suggested that maybe what Bobby and his brother encountered that night was actually a feral pig. However, authorities have never actually been able to pinpoint what this thing was. Nobody knows. And to this day, hikers and hunters near the swamps of southwest Arkansas and also across the border into East Texas still report run-ins with the legendary Fouke monster. Me and the whole team.
Wow, man, the freaking Fouke monster, the legend of Boggy Creek. Never heard of that cryptid story before, y'all. And I don't know, man, if Bigfoot and Sasquatch and all that stuff real, but all I like to say, man, is anything is possible. That'd be my answer every time. And I know it's a sorry ass answer, but that's just all I got, man. That's all I got for it. Great story, like I said, though, from MrBallen. We got one more to go. Let's go.
On the evening of August 1st, 2015, a 20-year-old man named Fraser Baloyi walked alone down a main road toward his village in the South African province of Limpopo. Fraser was on his way home from work, and he was pretty desperate to get there. It was only about 7:30 p.m., and usually around this time, Fraser was used to seeing other people out and about on this road, just kind of walking around in the dusk or, chatting or doing various errands, but tonight there was nobody out there. And in fact, in recent days, this area of Limpopo had basically become a ghost town. Nobody went out unless they absolutely had to, because over the last 10 days, over 20 people in this area had been brutally mauled. The victims had all insisted that the creature that had mauled them was some kind of four-legged demon, and they had begun calling it the Beast. Now, Fraser considered himself a pretty level-headed person who did not necessarily buy into the hype around this beast. He figured it was very likely just a dog. But still, he didn't want to get attacked, and so as he walked down this vacant road, he periodically looked over his shoulder just to make sure no dog was following him. As Fraser continued to walk along, he looked up and saw the huge forest fire that was raging on a mountain miles and miles off in the distance. A few days ago, the fire had started, and from Fraser's perspective, it still seemed to be going strong. In fact, in the darkness, it almost looked like the mountain was glowing red. Just then, Fraser noticed the turnoff for the shortcut that would take him through some forest back to his home, and when he got there, he stopped and looked over his shoulder one more time to make sure he was still all alone, and he was, and then he stepped off the main road, into the woods, and into the darkness. Under the tree canopy, the night suddenly seemed a lot darker. Fraser did his best to think about the chores he needed to do for his mother once he got home, instead of thinking about the beast. But he'd only been on this path for about 300 feet when he suddenly heard a rustling from behind him. And so right away, Fraser stopped and turned around and looked where the noise was coming from. But all he saw was darkness. There was nothing there. And so Fraser...
And I'll turn my head right back the fuck around and go back out the damn forest when I hear something running around me and I can't see nothing out here.
For a whole minute just stood there staring out into the tree line, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. And so Fraser told himself he was just being paranoid. Everything was fine. And then he turned back around and kept on walking. But pretty quickly, his walk turned into a jog. And he was almost to the end of this path, almost out of the forest. He could see his village. It was right there, when he heard noises behind him again. Except now, in addition to the rustling sounds, he heard a new sound. It was like a wheezing sound, like a sick animal that was breathing heavily. Now, Fraser knew he was not just being paranoid. Something was out there, and it seemed like it might be following him. Without slowing down, Fraser looked over his shoulder again to see what was out there, but again, he just saw nothing. It was just shadows. However, when he turned back around and kept on going towards his village, he heard this loud crashing sound behind him, like a massive animal had leapt out of the brush and landed on the path behind him. And so Fraser was immediately so scared he couldn't even turn around. He just started sprinting toward the village, and all he could hear behind him were these loud, pounding footsteps as whatever this was gaining on him. And so Fraser was so instantly terrified that instinctively he just started sprinting off without even looking behind him. And so as he's running, this thing's gaining on him, and again he can hear this awful wheezing sound coming from whatever this is, as if there was something wrong with its lungs. And in Fraser's panic, as he's sprinting through the forest, forest, Frazer's telling himself it's just gotta be a rabid dog. That's why it's making those sounds. But he knew that didn't track. This thing is huge. This can't just be a rabid dog. And so Frazer just kept on running, and finally he got out of the trees, back into his village, and at the exact same moment, the pounding footsteps behind him came to a stop. But again, Frazer, he didn't turn around. He's too scared. He just ran for his door. His house was right there in front of him, and he gets to his door. He's about to open it up, and right as he does, he feels this searing pain in his neck.
Oh.
This creature, whatever it was, had leapt and grabbed onto him and bit down on the back of his neck. And so Frazer crumpled to the ground and threw his arms up over his head to protect himself, and with one eye, he can see it's this massive black creature on top of him, chewing on the lower half of his face.
Oh.
And so Frazer, he couldn't even feel any pain. He just began screaming for help, and he tried to push it off of him, but he couldn't. And then a second later, a flash of metal came across his eye as his mother and other villagers who had seen this happening and heard him screaming came out and began smashing whatever this was with shovels. And so a second later, Frazer's pulled away and dragged towards his house, and this huge black creature, it marched over to the edge of the tree line and just stopped, turned, and looked back at Frazer and his mother and the neighbors. And Frazer, as he's sitting there in total shock, he can tell that whatever this thing is, this enormous dog-like creature, this had to be the beast.
Oh, hell yeah, it's the beast, Frazer. And I think the beast is trying to protect that forest. I think that's the beast thing. He like, anybody coming in this forest, you gonna get the business. You know what I'm saying, man? And now, everybody in that village should know that the beast is real at this point. No more, this no folklore. This is not he say, she say. No, the beast is real. Y'all seen it just eating his man's face, and we had to beat him up off of him. You know what I'm saying? And he just ran back to the woods. The beast is real.
That's what just attacked him. And in this moment, Frazer realized, this creature may have the shape of a dog, but it was not a dog. South Africa has its share of wild dogs, jackals, and hyenas, and typically they're multicolored and fairly small. And this thing was jet black, pitch black, and gigantic. And when this thing first started chasing Frazer, he'd had that panicked thought that maybe it was a rabid dog. But rabid animals are typically lethargic and confused. And this thing that was 15 feet away from them was absolutely alert and calm. The only thing sick about it was that horrible wheezing sound it would make as it breathed. And as Frazer and his mother and the neighbors just stood there staring at this thing, this creature just continued to stare back at them with piercing eyes. And its eyes were not normal. These were not like animal eyes or dog eyes. They were too small and set at the wrong angle. And there was real sentience behind them. They were human eyes. Just then, Frazer's mother grabbed Frazer and yanked him, kind of jerking him back to reality, and he scrambled to his feet, and he and his mother and the two neighbors, they took off running back into their respective homes. All the while, this creature just sat there on the edge of the forest, staring still in the direction of Frazer and his home. Once inside of Frazer's house, his mother immediately dialed the emergency number to tell the police about what had just happened, but the police told her they were not going to send people out there to deal with some dog. And so Frazer's mother decided she would just treat her son's wounds on her own until this dog-like creature had left, and then once it had, she would get him a ride to the hospital. However, as Frazer and his mother stared out the window at this creature, it didn't leave.
Oh.
It just sat there staring back at Frazer and his mother with these hideous human eyes for hours and hours. Finally, in the morning, it was gone. The attack on Frazer was the last straw for the people of his village. They believed the creature that had bit his face was the demon beast that had hurt so many other people. And so the elders of Frazer's village came up with a plan of how to deal with this beast. And so a few days after the attack on Frazer, this group of elders went off on a journey up into that mountain that Frazer had seen off in the distance that had that huge forest fire on it. And they were there for 2 whole days before returning to the village and telling everyone that they had successfully performed a ritual that had appeased their ancestors, and so hopefully now the attacks would stop. And sure enough, they did. They did not see the beast again. At least 40 people in Limpopo had encountered the beast at some point, either because they were attacked or they helped fend it off, like the neighbors did with Frazer. But because this beast was never caught, and it did stop attacking the village and just kind of disappeared, nobody ever actually figured out what it was. To this day, people in Fraser's village maintain that this creature was a demon and that it came down from the burning mountain, because every person, including Fraser, who had encountered this beast, noted its wheezing, heavy breathing, as if its lungs had been damaged by smoke. In all, at least 40 people in Limpopo encountered this beast, either because they were attacked or they helped fend it off. But because it was never caught, there is no definitive proof of what it actually was.
That's crazy, bro.
As many of you may know,
That one there so crazy, y'all, because it's like real life evidence that the beast, I'm not gonna even put it in quotation marks, because it's real life evidence that these people got terrible injuries, especially Fraser. Did y'all see that man's face? Did y'all see the lady with her hand effed up? The little kid got bite marks on his hand. Like, the beast is real. When I was saying it earlier, let me calm down a little bit. When I was saying it earlier, you know how I just be talking and joking bean team when I was like, the beast is real. Y'all should know the beast real now. But I ain't know MrBallen finna show pictures of actual victims from the beast. And then the thing that make it so weird is that these dudes went up in the mountains and they did little rituals and prayed and dropped holy water or whatever, and now the beast just disappeared. Something weird about that, man. It lead me to what MrBallen said, y'all. It gotta be a demon. That was a real life demon. Like, that is one of those cases like of a real life cryptid encounter for real, that people really got evidence of actually freaking happening, man. And he said it was 40 people and all that had to deal with this beast. Like, what the freak, man? I actually think MrBallen, he done won me over. I really do think it was something. It was some type of beast. And unless, like, what kind of animal would that be, y'all? It gotta be a big ass werewolf. If it's a werewolf, it gotta be a big ass werewolf, or maybe a Black Panther. But them people know what they was looking at. They know they weren't looking at no damn big ass black cat. You know what I'm saying, man? Them people was looking at the beast. Then all I'm talking about with the breathing and how that ties back to the forest fire that was going on. That was a great one from MrBallen, y'all. Most definitely, man. Most definitely. Long story short, story long. And the first one was just as good. Let me go back to it real quick. The first one, what was the first one, y'all? I'm so stuck on the second, I can't even remember the first one. The first one, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. That's one of the most crazy Bigfoot stories I ever heard. And it's almost like that's a Bigfoot lore within a Bigfoot lore, just in their area, the Bogey Creek area. You know what I'm saying? That's their town, their county, whatever version of Bigfoot. You know what I'm saying, man? Never even freaking heard of that a day in my life. And I ain't gonna lie, y'all. Like I said, man, I don't know if Bigfoot real and the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra. I don't know, but I will admit that I enjoy hearing stories about it, and especially when they coming from the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. But I digress. I'm gonna go and let y'all go now, man. I appreciate y'all coming on back as always. As y'all know, I will be back Tuesday, and we gonna go on through the week again like we have always done, my friends. And before y'all leave, just please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And remember this. Lord, peace and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.